Hey everyone, it's Nicole from Wiki. Welcome to the 2023 NRL season. Obviously, so far we've just had the preseason challenge, World Club challenge, Charity Shield, all that kind of stuff last weekend. So what I thought would be a cool idea, obviously, if you're watching this, you're probably from our Discord. You followed it across our Wiki socials the last couple of seasons, or on the Tripod Facebook group. So I really appreciate all the support. And I guess following and tagging along to our group and our Discord and stuff over the last season or two. This season, we're definitely going to up our game in terms of content. We've got a full-time marketing person from October, so it makes my life a lot easier. Obviously, just having to do this content here helps me get it out there. And our plans for sort of punting, for draft stars, a little bit of fantasy and Supercoach stuff as well. We've got a lot more that we've got planned this year. If you guys remember, we had the punters preview article. I started doing it around 10 or so last year. And obviously we had a few really successful weeks, including one game where we had Watson at first try scorer Radley as first try scorer, which we tipped at $67, and then Connor Watson first try scorer second half at 101. It's still undoubtedly my favorite ever NRL game, and obviously a few of you guys followed on to that bet, which is awesome. So this year, look, it's preseason. We don't even know final teams until Tuesday, I think 28th of February, which is obviously in a couple of days from today. I'm recording this on Friday, the 24th of February. But what I thought would be cool is there's a whole bunch of podcasts and Facebook groups and forums and social media all talking about the same thing. So I can imagine that most of you guys probably don't have the time to go through it all. I've soaked up as much as possible, and I thought I'd put it all together and put in some of my thoughts for the preseason round one, from predominantly a punting and a fantasy and draft stars point of view, but I'm just going to get into it. So first things first, what I thought I'd do is there was 9 games, obviously, last weekend. I'll get through maybe half the games, and I'll do like a really quick recap on a little bit more about our company and what we do. And then obviously, as usual, if you go across to our link tree, you can see the links to our social media, all our data tools, join our Discord, all that kind of stuff. Alrighty, so first game for last weekend was the Knights versus the Eels. I've made a little spreadsheet of our predicted teams for NRL round one. It's nothing, look, I'm not trying to sort of solve any magic riddles or anything. I'm just going through what I've seen on Daily Telegraph, NRL.com, and Fox Sports. And coming across to the Knights and the Eels, obviously the Knights being I've done this in ladder order from last year so far. So Greg Marju, I reckon he's going to be a pretty good in, obviously super powerful guy, but big tackle buster for the NRL Fantasy and Supercoach guys. Hastings, I think he'll be excellent for the Knights. Obviously, they had a pretty crap season last year, but I think Hastings will bring some personality to the team. He'll help with leadership as well with Ponga, who's still a relatively young guy. And Hastings has kind of started his career, I guess, getting on the wrong foot with a few of the Manly guys, but obviously gone to the UK and a lot more mature guy. So I think he'll do a really good job for the Knights. With the pack, they've got Adam Elliott, who was really, really good form for the Raiders last year as well. So I think he'll be a good addition. Jack Hetherington, he could be absolutely anything, but man, he'll be good fun to watch. From a team perspective, I still reckon the Knights will kind of be around that sort of like middle of the bottom 8, around that sort of 10, 11, 12 type of mark. I don't think they'll move too much from last season, but I think they'll be much more entertaining to watch, which I know if you're a Knights fan, doesn't really help you, but I think fantasy and punting and stuff, I think they'll definitely have some players to watch for us for the season. From the Eels point of view, they're going to have that. Anything, by the way, in yellow is someone who's filling in for a short-term injury or like in a bit of a contentious spot. So like they've obviously got a wing spot vacant, which we think Sean Russell will get that spot. Their pack is really, really interesting. So unfortunately, they've got Sean Lane with busted jaw. They've got Nathan Brown with a stuffed up hammy. And these are the guys that I think will take the spots for now. Murchie and Dury. Cartwright's on the bench in these predicted teams, but honestly, it could be any combination of those three fitting into 2 spots. Murchie is a bit of a favorite of ours. I think we tipped him at 51 or 61 maybe, when he was a bench Warriors player last season. He started in the second row. He scored, I think, 2 or 3 tries last year. And watch out for him if you find him at half decent odds. Anything about sort of $34 and above, I think could be pretty juicy for him this season for the Eels in a relatively strong team, which I think will sort of be in the bottom half of the 8. We'll go into the punting stuff in much more detail, obviously before round one, probably on the Wednesday before the first game of the season on the Thursday. But I thought I'd just open up this tool here. So we call this odds comparison tool, try score value finder, whatever you want really. But obviously these games have already happened, so I'm not going to sort of say that we would have won you all this money and stuff. But if you just go through some of the I'll go through very quickly each of the games. So, for example, Knights v Para, if I play around, the first thing that I'd probably do is go to first try scorer. I would go to Knights v Para. Essentially, what we're trying to do here is you've got the player's name, you've got the best odds that we could find for them across the bookies that we've got, and when we compare the odds. Historical value is basically what we do here is we look at how many games they've played, how many times that they've scored the first try in their career, and look at that strike rate and convert that to betting odds to make it really easy for you to see when you look at their odds available, is it a good value or not. So Lockie Miller, like obviously he's not the best example because he's not played very many NRL games, but just if you have a quick look, you can find him for $17. And he's done it, roughly 1 in 10 games in his NRL career. So obviously that $17 stands out. As you can just see, when you got limited sample size and stuff, it's not always the best value. But that's how we would use historical value. Model value. Our model is years of historical data punched into a statistical model to come out with a number, which we think like essentially the betting markets should have him around that mark. So we look at his historical value, we look at lines and totals. So the Knights would have been outsiders in that game. We take that into consideration. Whatever the total points number was for this game, we like 46.5 or whatever it was, we'll take that into consideration and then punch out this value. So a better way to do this would be to look at scroll by model value or sort by model value. Saifidi brothers. Now I usually love tipping them for good value first try scorer markets. If you look at, let's just say Jacob as an example, if you look at him, he's got 3 green lights. So according to our model, he's excellent value. Our model thinks he should be sort of in the mid-60s. He's obviously at 101. Historically, now he wouldn't have even started in a lot of the games that he's played in the NRL, but his sort of strike rate converted to betting odds is 40. And obviously 101 looks really good when you compare it to 40. And market value, what we do here is we look at the bookies that we do have and basically look at the best one, in this case, really easy numbers, 101, and then we compare it to the second highest number, which is 81. So even if you look at all the different bookies, he's still really good odds. So if I was doing a sort of game preview for this, Jacob Saifidi would definitely be one that I'd be putting in our punters preview article and a weekly video just like this one. Market value, Murchie, my man Murchie. Look, if he was starting and if this was regular season NRL, I don't think any of the bookies would have him at 41. But if they did, this is awesome. This is excellent value if he was starting. First try scorer at 41s. And if he wasn't, if we thought that he was going to sort of get some minutes on the edge just after the second half because he's on the bench, again, we'd look at him as potentially like a first try scorer second half at $41 odds. And in the anytime try scorer markets, obviously you do the same thing. I don't think $6.50 for Josh Watson ATS is accurate from our model. So, it's not just trust the model blindly, using a little bit of common sense. And obviously like our community on Discord and sort of Facebook group and stuff like that is a really good way to bounce some ideas off if you genuinely think it's a good bet. And from a market value point of view, again, Murchie, again, if he was starting at anything above $5, I'd be 100% getting on that. So some good value there. All right, so getting into the next game. So this is the format we'll follow, by the way. So we'll go through the team list, any sort of key changes for those teams, sort of high-level fantasy and Supercoach chat, and then get into a bit of try-scorer stuff. So Roosters and Manly, this is pretty interesting because before this game started, Cherry Evans was out, Turbo wasn't playing just yet. And looking at the Roosters team, like obviously there was Crichton missing. Obviously he's got some mental health issues or off-field issues that he's dealing with at the moment. So Egan Butcher starting, and then the other one that was missing is obviously Luke Keary. But pretty much like Tedesco, Sawali, Collins, Smith, Lodge, Butcher, Radley. Like that is a pretty gun team if you look at it. And playing Manly without Turbo and Cherry Evans, I wasn't punting much on preseason stuff, but looking at that, the Roosters looked like a pretty good bet. And obviously they got upset by Manly. So that was quite interesting. From a team's point of view, looking at the Roosters, they've got Paulo coming in. After the way he played, I think a few of the Roosters fans saying they'd love Momorowski to take that spot. But aside from that, again, Crichton missing, so Egan Butcher comes in. A lot of fantasy and Supercoach classic, like season-long players, are sort of umming and ahhing whether to bring in Egan Butcher. Personally, I'm going to avoid him because I think there's a lot of value in the second row and sort of middle forwards in both fantasy and Supercoach. But if you do want to bring him in, I don't think it's the worst pick. You know, you don't exactly know how many weeks Angus Crichton is going to miss. But if you get, say, 3, 4, 5 weeks of Egan Butcher, close to 80 minutes on an edge, he's a beast already off the bench in 40, 50 minutes. So if he gets that sort of edge role, they've got two really, I want to say easy, but they've got two relatively soft games to start the season. So if he gets some really good attacking stats early, and then he holds like decent minutes off the bench, maybe round 5, 6, 7, or whenever Angus is back, that's still a really good buy for the early season. He could net you a lot of points. And then you can obviously trade him on to someone better once he's gotten some price rises for you. Aside from that, the one I will be going for is actually Nat Butcher. So Nat Butcher, I think he scored 4 tries in a game last year once. And obviously with those 2 relatively soft games coming up, and he should hold that spot for most of the season with Tupanua not due back until, I'm going to say halfway through the season. I think he's coming back from ACL from memory. So I think Nat Butcher is the way to go. I'm going to have him in my fantasy and Supercoach teams most likely to start with. Won't comment on Teddy. Obviously, he's a gun. Him and Latrell are probably like the main sort of winger fullback or fullback guns to start the season. Soft draw to start with, consistent as always. Don't think there's any reasons not to pick him aside from your team balance. So won't sort of take too much more about him. Aside from that, the Roosters, there's Manly. Manly is really interesting this year. I think there was 2 things. Tom Trbojevic got injured, and they had some off-field issues at the end of the season. Obviously, their season got derailed in the last sort of 5 or 6 weeks. So obviously, Tom Trbojevic, it's amazing value in Supercoach, really good value in fantasy. They do have that bye week 2, so it's a little bit awkward, but I assume a lot of people will be picking him. Cherry Evans, Jake Trbojevic, it's not too much you can sort of add on in all honesty about them, except for the fact that Jake has been moved from lock to prop. They've got a new coach. Few people are thinking that he'll be a lot more involved in terms of like pure runs and tackles instead of being that link man with Desi Hasler gone. Potentially, but I just don't think that's enough to justify picking him in your team. Maybe for draft, you'd have him slightly higher on the pecking order than you might have in the last year or two. The really interesting one for me here, and the guy that I'll be looking for, and I now understand why NRL commentators struggle so much with a lot of these names. Hamale Olakwatu, he was an absolute beast last season. And that's, he had some incredible stats while Cherry Evans and Trbojevic were sort of in good form. But when their team struggled towards at the end of the season, obviously he did too. So I think if Trbojevic is named round 1, Manly, obviously new coach, new season, he'd be a little bit of a pod Supercoach pick, and one that I'll definitely be going at least in Supercoach and maybe even in fantasy. So I think he'll be a really exciting, at least a fun way to start the season. Cooper Johns, I've got him in there because Josh Schuster is confirmed to be missing round 1. Definitely wouldn't be picking Cooper Johns. He's most likely only going to be filling for a week, and then they've got the buy straight after. Schuster, there's 2 ways you can go about it. NRL Fantasy, obviously prices don't change for a while. So you could probably, and he's actually not priced that cheaply there as well. So you probably want to wait. Supercoach, you could save yourself a trade. Just bring him in from the start. He'll be playing most likely from round 3. So you should be good there. From a punting point of view, that game, unfortunately I didn't see this. I updated the tool and didn't actually see this, but definitely Olakwatu at $5 odds, even though there were slight outsiders, 3 green lights. He was value anywhere that you look at it. Definitely would have wanted to get on that. I didn't see it, and luckily he didn't actually score, so that worked out well. From a first try scorer point of view, there was a few that seemed to be in green lights. The one that I would love though is Victor Radley. I think I mentioned earlier in the video, there was that game that we had Radley at 67's first try score, and he actually did it. And then we tipped Connor Watson at 101 to score the first try in the second half, and that got up as well. An amazing day, but it all started obviously with Victor Radley. I'm not sure why Tab, for whatever reason, just underestimates his try scoring ability. But if you convert how often he scored the first try in his career so far to betting odds, it would be around that $33 mark. Most sites had him between 23 and 31. For whatever reason, Tab had him at 67. So 67 compared to the second highest 31. You can see that he's very clear value compared to the market. Historical, again, compared to that number 33, 67, it's roughly double. So there you go, 200%. And even our model, who sort of looks at the fact that he's a lock forward and sort of brings him out a little bit, like gives him a lower chance and therefore shows him at higher odds compared to his historical strike rate. Even the models dragged him out to 47. And yeah, 67 is obviously still a really good value. So he's definitely one that I would have written about in the punters preview, talked about on our Discord. He didn't end up getting it, but yeah, definitely a really good value play. Aside from that, oh man. So Bullimore being 81s, I would have absolutely loved that. So he used to be a Brisbane bench forward maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Scored 2 tries in a season from memory, like busting through the middle as a bench forward. And now he's obviously a little bit more established. Has actually had some games starting for Manly on the edge. So obviously, if he's named at 15, if this was an NRL round, I wouldn't expect him to get any edge time. Or Tuolangi's playing, so he may get some edge time. But I'd love this play as a first try scorer second half or an LTS for Neds at 81s. You can see how good that is in terms of market value. No other site has him higher than 51s. Historical and model, like obviously he's on the bench, so he's not going to get first try scorer, but this is a really good way to find potential last try scorer or first try scorer second half plays. So these are just some of the ways that we sort of break down try scorer markets game to game. Dragons Rabbitohs, like, oh man, I'm actually one of my good mates is a Dragons fan. There's just really nothing good you could say. Well, nothing really, honestly, to be excited about, unfortunately, for the Dragons. And this scoreline, the only thing that surprises me that the Dragons scored 24 points. I know it's going to be really exhausting, sort of getting into every single game from round one. So I tried not to watch the trial, so I didn't actually see what happened here. Maybe the Rabbitohs sort of rested a few players late. But no surprises. The Rabbitohs won 42-24. Again, looking at the teams for these guys, the Rabbitohs, we've got Latrell, Cody, Cook, and Murray. That's the core and the heart of the team. Alex Johnston just breaking records on the wing. No surprises there. So not a lot of changes for the Rabbitohs. So in terms of the Supercoach and fantasy, a few people want to sort of. I've seen talk of Latrell being a good pick at the start. For even though he's got a tricky few games first up. I'm sort of sitting on the fence, not too fast. I'm not picking him personally, but obviously he's a class player, so saying nothing against people that do want to pick him. I think the really interesting standout is Cam Murray. He had a great season last year. He'll know that with their bench of Taff or Mamazelos, Host, Mawale, Mitchell, and then potentially Havili and Sele when they're back. It's not a great bench. It's lacking depth. It's got a couple of relatively sort of young or sort of inexperienced guys on the bench. So I think Murray will know he needs to lead from the front, play big minutes, and do a really good job this season. I think given that it's the case, if you're going to leave out a Cleary or a Hines, I think Murray's fine as like a vice captain or a captain option. And I think I think a lot of the sort of debate has been Murray versus Tapine versus Haas. I think all three of them, Murray and Tapine have sort of got a few more minutes in their forward pack. Sorry, they can get this year. Haas had a little bit of a down season last year. I can see like a little bit of an uptick in all three of them, but I think Murray's the way to go in terms of if you're going to go at the start of the season. Whereas Tapine, I think he'll be sort of get himself into the season, and you kind of want to pick him up around. Forgot exactly when Canberra's bye is, but like around 7, 8, 9, just before the Origin period. Whereas obviously you don't want Murray or Haas going to the Origin period. But I think Murray's a great pickup if you're going to go with him. Very early in your draft, or sort of pick him as your captain in fantasy or Supercoach. Definitely wouldn't be talking you out of that. The Dragons, I was actually shocked that they weren't actually too far away from the 8 last year. I can definitely see them coming 16th or 17th. In the tripod preview, Jacob and Jacob and Clarkey, I think both went them 16th and 17th. Yeah, I just can't see them sort of being any higher than 15th at the very best. Won't talk about them too much. I can't really see that much fantasy and Supercoach relevance. Terrell Sloan, he's going to be popular because he's cheap, but his work rate and sort of involvement is super low. He is a really classy finisher, but how many opportunities is he really going to get? Hunt, Lomax, and Sully, I can see a lot of the Dragons' attacks that are being sent around those guys, but the real worry is the pack. Aaron Woods is likely going to be in that sort of jersey 16 or 17. I've got him here just hoping for the Dragons fans that they sort of show a bit more faith in Billy Burns. But honestly, there's just not a lot of sort of firepower in that pack, which is why I think the Dragons are going to struggle. If you disagree, please let us know. And Dragons fans, good luck. That's all I can say. From a punting point of view for this game, let's go. Wanted to talk about this. So if you go by model value, obviously I'd look at both these middles here, Tola and Burgess. They were strong favourites pre-game, much better pack. If I saw them at 180, 101 and 81 respectively, I 100% would have bet on them in an NRL sort of round. Definitely would have talked them up in our punters preview and our Discord, etc. Even if you look by market value, they're way better on one site than they're on others. You know, if you look at 101 and 81 compared to the others here. I even sort of saw that Tom Burgess was 81, but I thought, you know what, it's preseason. It is a little bit of a long shot. Maybe I'll just leave these plays for the regular season. And lo and behold, I check the Charity Shield results, I think the morning after the game, and you look at first try scorer and big Tommy Burgess, he's right there 6 minutes into the game. So obviously that would have been a really, really nice win to bank. But look, I didn't say it to anyone, and I didn't punt on it, so can't feel too bad. Hopefully NRL round one's got a few middle try scorers to make up for it. Moving on to very quickly, anytime try scorer, was there anything obvious? No, nothing obvious. All good. I will move on. Panthers, they got upset in the World Club Challenge. I won't talk too much about this because we don't have this on our odds comparison tool. I'll have a very quick look at the predicted teams. Unfortunately, Taylor May, ACL, gone for the season. Taruva most likely gets that spot. They do have like another rookie that I've heard on a couple of forums that could play. I have forgotten his name, but if he's named on Tuesday at 4 p.m. in a couple of days from now, you'll know his name and you'll know to pick him. So that's pretty obvious. Garner and Hosking, few mixed reports, few people, I think it was on the SC Playbook podcast, a few people saying Garner didn't play really well. He's played for the Tigers for a few years, and he does have potential. He's in a new system. I reckon if they pick him to start, he'll get at least 60 minutes, even if Hosking does steal 20 minutes if he's named on the bench. I think with Garner, if he's named to start, if you can afford him, pick him. There are a few other values, second row and sort of mid options. But I think if you give him sort of 4 or 5 weeks, he'll gel really nicely with the rest of this Panthers outfit. Aside from that, I just don't think there's too much point talking too much about Cleary and Hines. There's every podcast and Facebook group and forum have covered that. Can't think of anything really to add. Kenny and Sonny Luke, that's a really interesting one. So the Daily Telegraph, I think it was Tom Santa, was saying that he heard that Kenny was going to sort of start the first 25, 30 minutes and then Luke would play most of the game afterwards. So he became really popular on Supercoach especially. And then it kind of came to the World Club Challenge, and I think from memory, Luke didn't even play. I'll double check that. Yeah, he didn't even play. Like, I assume he's coming back from injury, or just was rested or whatever it is. But it just doesn't give you a lot of confidence going into that 50-minute role that was being talked about. So I'd definitely be staying away from Luke early in the season. Kenny, I think with NRL Fantasy, he's fine to pick. With Supercoach, obviously he has like pretty much no upside, so I'd probably stay away from him. Yep, mentioned Drew already. Nothing too much else to talk about with the Panthers. Broncos Cowboys, another one. I'm kind of happy I stayed away from punting on this weekend because I thought the Cowboys were way better on paper with Reynolds and Reece Walsh missing. So I was like pretty confident actually, to be honest, on the Cowboys after their season last year. Pretty much full strength. I think it was actually full strength. I don't think they were actually missing anyone. But then, yeah, they got upset by the Broncos. So there you go. from their team's point of view, Cowboys, yeah, pretty much, as I said, full strength. They're missing Luciano Leilua, off-field issues at the moment. And Helam Luki, he looked like he was going to be a star by the end of the season, but obviously Nanai ended up getting a lot of the sort of plaudits and sort of rep opportunities that we thought Luki would get. Unfortunately, he's still out for, I think, roughly half the season, coming back from an ACL, or at least sort of the first 5 to 10 rounds. Cohen Hess, like, not many people are talking about him at all, but I think he could be a really interesting draft option and a potential pick in the second row in Supercoach Classic. He's playing for a Cowboys team who are high on confidence after last season, have a really easy draw to start this season. And I think aside from Hess, who I think could be a really good pod to start off the year for you, Holmes or Drinkwater, one of the two. If you're like me and you sort of like taking a bit of a punt in Supercoach, I reckon you got to go one of them two to start your season and just hope that they absolutely go on a tear in the first few weeks. And you can obviously trade them away closer to Origin, with Holmes obviously missing quite a few weeks. And with Drinkwater, if you're for example staying away from Tommy Turbo for the first couple of weeks because he's got to buy, and you just want to see if he make sure he doesn't get injured early on, you could go Drinkwater for the first month, see how Turbo goes early in the season, see how his form is, and then go Drinkwater Turbo when you think the timing is right. That's probably it from a Supercoach and fantasy perspective for the Cowboys. Broncos were surprising, as I said, they won on the weekend. I've got Walsh starting at fullback, assuming he makes it in time for round one. Obviously, if he doesn't, Cobo is a beast rookie at the moment, so he'll go into fullback. Arthurs will probably come onto the wing. For fantasy and Supercoach, Haas, I reckon, had a little bit of a down year last year in terms of his numbers. I reckon this year he kind of steps it up and sort of is ready to go. I'd almost pick him as a captain in fantasy. I think at the moment I do have him as my captain. I've left out Cleary and Hines and Teddy and a couple of the other options that are pretty popular. Their bench, their sort of middle rotation is a bit interesting. So they've got Carrigan and Haas. I reckon Carrigan gets roughly 60 minutes, or both of them get roughly 60 minutes. And then Jensen, Flegler to Powell get that sort of like 30 to 40 minute type of role. Pelasia could be any of their other sort of like boom rookies getting that sort of 20-minute role. But going to Flegler, I did hear a rumor that he's potentially going to go to Manly. So just something to keep an eye out on. To Powell, obviously coming to the Broncos. He's obviously sort of in the last few years of his career, but I reckon he could be like a really good 25, 30-minute prop forward, just giving it his all. Whereas like you got you guys like Haas and Carrigan that sort of play much bigger minutes. So that'll be interesting to look at. Ezra Mann, I think there's a really good shout for draft. I reckon like not many people will sort of think about him actively in the early rounds, and it'll be like that guy that, like a live wire that you hope that just plays really well for maybe the first half of the season, gets you through that origin period where he's going to be really involved for the Broncos while they're missing a couple of their other stars. And Reece Walsh, another one, just to keep an eye out on to see how he goes. If the Broncos do start the season well, I reckon Walsh will do a really well at start. But as we've always seen with him in the Warriors, it's just, can he be consistent that whole season, which is a little bit worrying. Punting point of view, let's have a look at the odds comparison tool. Was there anything? I know it says Townsend was really good value, but look, yeah, okay. 3 green lights, I'd have to promote it. He's obviously getting a little bit older, but he did score a couple of tries last year, Townsend, for the Cowboys. It just always happened to be at the wrong time of the game, I think, from memory. Aside from that, wouldn't talk up anyone else, I don't think. Haas and Tamalolo, I think I may not sort of necessarily bring them up as like amazing plays, but decent value for sure. Haas, he scored the first try, 1 in every 27 games in his NRL career. So obviously 81s is pretty juicy and he's way better than he is on other sites. Tamalolo the same in terms of way better than on other sites, but there's only 2 other comparisons. We will have, I think, 6 bookies to choose from once the NRL season proper starts. But I think with Lolo, not necessarily first try scorer. Where I really liked him was anytime try scorer at $11 odds. You can see throughout it, it's obviously been quite a long career now. $7.38 would be his odds if you went off his historical strike rate, and you're getting 11s. And obviously they were the pre-game favorites as well. So I really like those $11. From a model point of view, nothing amazing. So I'll move on. Warriors Storm. Only thing that surprised me here was like the low scoring game. I don't know if there was much. It'd be interesting to hear from sort of anyone in the comments or in our Discord like why this was a low scoring game. But I would have thought like Storm with Meaney, Munster, Hughes, Grant would have put some points on a Warriors outfit that's got a few changes in it. From a team perspective, Storm, Nick Meaney, fantasy and Supercoach. I've locked him in as in my sort of fullback or winger fullback position. I was pretty surprised that he's not that popular. Like he's a goal kicking fullback for the Storm. Pappenhausen's out for like up to about 10 weeks or so. So I was pretty surprised that he's not more popular. Definitely one that I'd be looking in for draft as well. Warbrick apparently was a bit of a beast on the weekend and most likely gets Eremia's right wing. Ooh, don't know which side actually, but most likely with Eremia out with an ACL. Warbrick apparently looks like he's going to get that spot. Olam and Seve are both injured at the moment, so young Tony Papaya looks like he'll get that center spot. The pack is going to be really interesting. They've got both the Bromwich brothers and Felice Kafusi gone to the Dolphins. So Layero and Katoa in the second row. It's going to be kind of messy when Tariq Sims comes back in a couple of weeks to see if one of them potentially go back to the bench. Katoa played really well for the Warriors a couple of seasons ago, where Layero has been in the Storm system now for a couple of seasons. So it's going to be a really, really tricky call if you're an overall sort of season-long fantasy and Supercoach player. I'm probably going to go with Katoa just because I know that he's got sort of more upside as a player. He can score a lot of tries and just like a big tackle busting type of guy. But if there's any sort of late mail on who's likely to keep that spot long term, the press conferences and stuff, I'd definitely be looking out for that to help you sort of make a decision there. Harry Grant is one that I'm really keen on. Like Brandon Smith's gone. He knows he's got to step up with a few players now missing for the Storm. There's no sort of like option for him to, go play halfback because Brandon Smith's around and all that kind of stuff. So I think Grant, he's got to be sort of playing close to 80 minutes almost every game. The origin period is probably really going to take something out of him this year. But I think like early, like first 10, 11 rounds or whatever it is before origin, Harry Grant, really good pick to me from the Storm. Warriors, I won't talk about too much. I can't think of anything too exciting about them in terms of fantasy and Supercoach. CNK, he's back to the Warriors. He had a lot of games last year where he didn't play the full 80 minutes and he was injured. So I definitely have him in my fantasy team. I think from memory he's available at center wing in Supercoach. And if he is, I'd definitely pick him at a decent price. And if he's only a fullback, then I'd obviously stay away. TMM, I think again, winger fullback is priced decently on fantasy, so I'd be picking him there. Or at least consider picking him there. Forward pack, I'd be wary of Ford and Niokore. With Curran, he could be named to start in NRL teams, but he was on the bench. That might just be to sort of like put some quality on their bench aside from. I know Fowler's been sort of really good for the Warriors over a long period of time. Walker's new to the club. I think Curran's going to play like a hybrid role between edge and middle, which is why he's on the bench. And Tavanga's obviously going to be coming back soon. So I'd just be really wary of that Warriors pack and picking anyone from there pretty much. Punting point of view, let's have a look. Don't know if I would have sort of talked much about Welsh and Eisenhuth, even though they are sort of really good model value. Welsh is obviously coming back off another long-term injury. I know he's the captain this year. He's going to play big minutes, all that kind of stuff. Grant is good at putting his sort of middle forwards through a hole, like especially early in games. That would have been like 50-50 in terms of if I covered any of them into the punters preview and highlight them as good picks. Market value. So Kemi Kamika, he is out for the first 6 weeks or so of the NRL season. But if I saw him in an NRL game, especially against the Warriors, at 81s, at first try score second half, because he'd be coming off the bench, I would have gone nuts and sort of put that all over the punters preview and our Discord and everything. And from any time try scorer markets, probably, oh my God, yes, yeah. So Kamika again, 11s, really like that. So his career strike rate converted to betting odds would be $8.88, but that number should definitely be lower than that, considering they would be strong favorites coming up against the Warriors. And if you look at sort of market value, sort of around that $5-6 mark, I think like a fair price for him would have been maybe around $7 or $8, but 11 is just really, really good. So definitely be talking about him. Next up, Tigers and Raiders. The Tigers are one of the teams that I think everyone's excited to see this year. Obviously, I've done these teams in ladder order, and you can see that they came last year. But you look at that and you go, Otoko Manu had an excellent year 2 seasons ago. He was just come back from injury last year. He's still young, and he was been talking about it like a future Origin player. Coruscant coming off 2 premierships, going to add a lot to this Tigers team. Clemmer has done it all in the game pretty much, and he's going to be he'll just bring minutes to the pack. Like he'll just have good, solid hit ups and tackles, 50-ish minutes. Tigers really need someone dependable like that. Ice Papali's been excellent the last 2 seasons. Offengawe was like a young gun at the Broncos, now like a really solid middle player. So is Twal. And then you got Bateman, who will most likely take the second rower spot, but he's just got into the country and has had no NRL preseason, which is why I've got Glaw there for now. But yeah, you could potentially see Bateman named there on Tuesday. I just think this is a much, much improved Tigers outfit. Dewey is as well, like he's got the preseason behind him. I think he played roughly half the season, if not less, for the Tigers last year. But he starts this season. Laurie started it last season really well and then faded when the Tigers sort of, well, obviously they came last and they didn't have a good end to the season. Noff, really good long-term winger, really powerful player. Staines brings some speed. Like I think this is genuinely a really fun, exciting team. A little bit like the Dogs last year, where they've made some real improvements in terms of their squad. They've obviously got Tim Sheens as the coach as well, with Benji around, who'll be taking over. There's just a lot of positives. Still can't see them making the 8, but I can at least challenge. I can see them playing like the Dogs last year, where they might struggle in the first sort of like 4 to 6 weeks as they kind of get used to all these new players. But you kind of see around the Origin period when most other teams lose people to Origin, these guys lose. I'm pretty confident it'll be maybe Epi Carousel, depending on how the Blues go, and that's it. That should be it. So while everyone else is losing players, the Tigers will basically be losing no one, or maybe like 1 or 2 players at absolute most. And that'll be a really good time, just like the Dogs did last year, to get a bit of form and some momentum and make a charge, maybe sort of towards that sort of, or close to the top 8 at least. And the Raiders, I'll have a quick look at their squad. So they obviously like snuck into the 8 last season because the Broncos carved it towards the end. In terms of their team, yellow, as you can see, like Mooney could be any of the sort of 2 or 3 other forwards. Wolford had a few games last year, but it's likely going to be Levi and Starling. Fantasy and Supercoach wise, there's a Rapana article on NRL.com where he just says, I'm too old to play fullback anymore. So I don't know if Ricky will actually listen to him, but I've named him on the wing and Chris at fullback because he's played a little bit of fullback, I think, in the trials. You'll obviously see what happens for sure come NRL team list next Tuesday. I don't think there's a lot of value there, to be honest. And even if there is, like Savage is going to be back in, I think 6 to 8 weeks. I just wouldn't really want to be picking any Raiders backs on the promise of a fullback spot when that could just change 3 weeks down the line and they could lose their spot in 6 weeks. Wyden, class player, just never too good of a pick, unfortunately, in fantasy and Supercoach. Fogarty, the Raiders season actually changed for the good when he came into the side. So if he does start quietly, or if you're looking for someone in your draft, Fogarty could definitely be a good pick. Big Papa, my favorite, because he's the best NRL try scoring middle forward of all time, or at least in the last sort of 20, 30 years in the NRL time as well, at least, sorry. Gula, he could be an interesting one for fantasy and Supercoach if he does get that starting spot and gets closer to about 40 minutes rather than the 30 that he was getting last year. Tapine, if he does kick that lock roll and sort of actually get 55, 60, 65 minutes, then yeah, you just have to trade him in. Don't even think twice. I know I said just earlier in the video that he might start slow given he had a long season last year and sort of primed towards sort of the round 6, 8, 10 time going to Origin when they're missing Papali. But if he starts and gets 60 minutes at lock, round 1 and 2, you just have to trade him in no matter what. And definitely one I'd be looking at for draft 2. There could potentially be some value in Horsburgh and CHN, but I wouldn't be picking them straight up because you kind of need to see the forward balance between Gula, Horsburgh, and CHN. and see if one of them are potentially getting the big bulk of minutes, or if it's just shared evenly. And if it is shared evenly, there's not much value there, which I'm sure you guys can understand. And try scorers from the trial round. Levi at 81s, that would have been an interesting pick. I probably would have gone like a really small stake and a small mention in our punters preview article. Gula, though, absolutely love Gula. Great ball runner. I think he scored a try or two, even though he wasn't getting many more than 30 minutes most games. 81s, 100% would have recommended him as an FTS or first try scorer pick if this was before an NRL round. This is really interesting. So you can see here, Staines was named on the bench. We all know he's a gun winger. Wouldn't obviously recommend anyone bets on him first try scorer if he's named on the bench. But depending on the side, if you can see that he's got, well, generally, I just wouldn't talk about it too much, but just something to be wary of, because if that gets changed an hour before the game and he's confirmed to start, and then the bookie still has him at 21, bang, FTS, anytime try scorer, all these things are any great value. So that's just like another way of just keeping an eye out for value and seeing how teams change throughout the week. Nothing much to write home about here. Going to the next one, dogs and sharks. Having a look at this, it was really annoying. So there was TPJ, Pangai Jr. Unfortunately, he's going to be out for a few weeks now. And Royce Hunt was ruled out late for the Sharks as well. So hopefully he's back. But I'll go to the Sharks team. Where are they? Second. So yeah, Hunt and ULA, we won't know for sure, but they usually flip a little bit. But either way, they play that sort of 30-minute power role for the Sharkies, and they've got Rudolph, Finucane, McInnes as sort of like the bigger middle forwards. An interesting thing to note here would be Wilton. Now, he's been sort of talked about in fantasy and Supercoach circles as a pretty good pick this year. I think it's a bit of an awkward pick. He did score 2 tries at the weekend, by the way, for the left edge for the Sharkies. Matt Moylan had, I think I heard on one of the podcasts here, the most try involvements of any player in the NRL last year, and Mulatalo scored a couple on the left edge as well. So I don't know if it was the right edge for the Dogs leaking tries or the Sharks left edge just being too good. But either way, Wilton, I think he'd be one to look out for. The worry is, though, that if Graham is playing 40 minutes and it's 20 in the middle and 20 on the edge, Wilton will not be good value at 60 minutes. Wilton will be great value or really good value at 80 minutes, but you just don't know. Wade Graham's still the captain of the club, and I think it could be potentially a case of Wade Graham just filling in where required, and that could mean, let's just say every second game he takes 15, 20 minutes off Wilton. That's Wilton averaging about 70 minutes, and it kind of makes him a borderline pick. I don't think he's theoretically a really good pick, but there's just risk if he doesn't get 80. That's all. So from that, obviously there's Nico Hines. He was absolute freak last year, won the Dally M. The Sharks obviously ended up second, as you guys can see. I wouldn't talk anyone out of picking him for Supercoach and fantasy. But the tricky thing will be if he gets named at number 14 instead of Origin, it obviously means that he'll miss quite a few games by the middle of the season. I was actually thinking that if I was going to pick Hines or Cleary, I'd go Hines. If you can't think of a way to sort of split the two, I'd just go Hines because Cleary is definitely going to be playing Origin. You pick Hines and he's just there all season. But aside from that, not too much for the Sharks. And the Doggies, similar sort of vibe to what the Tigers this year give a similar vibe to where the Dogs were last year, except this year the Dogs have a couple more signings now with Reid Marnie, Vila Kikau, Ryan Sutton as well. That's 3 really good signings in their pack. They've also got, this is a bit of a side note for try scorer stuff later on, but Manu Brown, if you ever see him at good odds first try scorer second half, get on. I don't have the stats in front of me right now, but I think he scored like at least 3 or 4 tries last year, and that was as a bench forward, getting like 20, 30 minutes a game on average, I reckon. So sneaky one, look out for Manu Brown as a try scorer. Aside from that, for the Dogs, I really hope they can challenge for the top 8 this year. They did really well in the second half of last season, and Matt Burden was obviously like a big reason why. But last year, it was pretty much like Burden, Addo Carr, and that was about it. Like they just didn't have the class around them. Whereas now they've got like Luke Thompson's obviously settled in, or sort of has to take a more senior leadership position. Max King, he came from the Storm last year. He's got another season, sort of in the full-time NRL system. And then the class now of a kick out, of an RFM, and a Reed Marnie. Like that should really change the team. And hopefully they can sort of sit around that sort of 7th, 10th and be in it to make the finals late in the season. Punting point of view, this was another heartbreaking game where if I was actually like, if I was actually doing the punters preview and sort of like putting the tips out and sort of betting on all the things that I usually would have, one that would have stood out to me was Vili Kikau. Now, historical value, you've really got to be careful with this because obviously players change position, they've changed clubs, there's a few things. But someone like Kikau, he's played second row pretty much his whole career. Yes, that's been for the Panthers, but if you look at these numbers here, if you convert how often he scored the first try for the game and put it into betting odds, it's around 14. And if you look at every other site, they've got him around like 17 or 19 because they were the Dogs were the outsiders. And then Neds, you see, he's at 26. So like I understand why he'd be kind of 15, maybe even up to 20, because the Dogs were the outsiders. He's not playing for the Panthers anymore, and the Sharks were the favourites pre-game. But 26 is just such a good number. And on Neds and Ladbrokes, you could have boosted that as well. So painful, but hopefully he's saved the best for the actual season for us. Another one, ULA, depending on the bookie. So if he was actually named on the bench, in the end he ended up starting. But if he was named on the bench in an NRL game and he was available for 67, first try scored second half, that would 100% have been on the punters preview. Really, really good play, given he's one of the best try scoring middle forwards in the NRL. Last season he was a bit hit and miss, but he's definitely or he's got a full preseason in now, so hopefully he's much better and ready to go this year. TPJ, I was so keen on him at 101. Unfortunately, he got ruled out late, obviously, and now he's out for a few weeks for that. I think it's a calf strain. Royce Hunt, he was ruled out as well, but again, 67s. Our model liked it. He would have been in around the 50 mark. I really liked it just compared to other sites as well. And he's one of those guys that falls in the bucket of really powerful ball runner. And I think scored 1 or 2 tries last year as well. So one to look out for there. Moving on, I think this is the last game now. So Dolphins and Titans, we didn't have try score odds for this stuff, but we will have the Dolphins incorporated into our models and our try score odds comparison page and all the rest of it real soon. Before round 1, to be clear. With both of these teams, I'll go into a really quick review of these. Nothing too inspiring for the Dolphins. Aitken, I think he and the coach both said he'll be playing center, so I've got him in there, but that may change come team list if I'm proven wrong from the mail that we've seen on a few different sites. Forward pack, a lot of these guys played the same roles for their NRL teams last season. Aside from probably Tom Gilbert, if you get 60 minutes at lock, then I'd definitely consider him because he kind of had a lot of sort of minutes sharing the strong Cowboys pack last year. And obviously Ray Stone coming off an injury, priced pretty well in. I think fantasy is really cheap and Supercoach is relatively cheap. So one to look out for there. The hammer's really popular in Supercoach, but how many attacking chances is this team really going to get? So I'd be really wary. If there are other cheapies, I'd almost sort of look to go the pod way and leave him out. And if the Dolphins surprise you or if he does, you can always bring him in. He is cheap, but I think you'd be better off putting in like a lesser known cheapie instead of the hammer early on, and it could potentially save your trade. And who they're up against, the Titans, again, similar to the Dogs in that actually, you know what? I'll talk about them separately. So the Titans 2 years ago made the finals and should have beaten the Roosters if it wasn't for Patrick Herbert. I forgot what he did. I think he held on to a pass or he threw sprayed the last pass. But essentially, it was a pretty easy try and they would have beat the Roosters in the first final. They didn't. And then they went on to miss the finals last year and come about 13th, I'm going to say. Yeah, 13th. No. Yeah, 13th. But they've actually got a pretty decent team this year. So they've got Kieran Foran from Manly, Verrills from the Roosters. That immediately, I think, upgrades them slightly. Then they've got, Brimson settled now at fullback. He's locked in. Fafita felt like he had to do it all himself in attack last year. Hopefully he's got a little bit more support and structure around him. Fermore's going to have Foran with him on the left edge. So that'll be really interesting to see where he takes his game. this year. Tino actually had really good stats last year, but hopefully in a slightly better team, we can see a bit more impact from him. Aaron Clark did way better at lock than he did at fullback. At hooker in the early sort of first half of the season. And obviously Mo Fotuaika is a class prop as well. So I think these guys definitely have some promise. Not quite as strong as the Bulldogs, but I really hope that the Titans are at least close to the 8 at some point, sort of halfway through the year, so they've got something to play for in the last few rounds. And I think well, obviously we don't have the try score stuff for this game, but I think one thing that I wanted to do is just point out a couple of the good resources that I use. So we've got NRL Supercoach stats. If you go to stats 22 and then minutes, this is the resource. If you go to like any NRL team, go to Para, you can have a look at their forward pack rotation in terms of minutes, all in the one page. Really good resource by these guys. I use this week to week to check out how different forward packs are going. Really useful if you're playing fantasy, Supercoach, or Draft Stars. Footystatistics.com. This is made by a guy on the forum, NRL Fantasy Fanatics. I've been part of that forum. It used to be called the old Sportal forums. I've been part of that for Sportal for like 15 years, the NRL Fantasy Forum for over 10 years. Really, really good place without the crap on a lot of Facebook groups, which is one way to put it. Obviously, like they let you look at stuff like sort of who's popular in recent days and who's not. Schuster, obviously, with the calf injury. TPJ, I think both of these guys' injuries. Schuster's meant to be back round 3. TPJ probably around round 4 or 5 from memory. Perham didn't play well in the trials, so people are going off that. But, he's still the fullback for the Dogs. I'll still be picking him. Tabio Fido, I think, people just realize that he's playing for the Dolphins this year, I think. Sloan, again, playing fullback for a poor team. Swali'i, I think there's an injury doubt after that. I think facial, not fracture, but facial. I think he had some sort of injury. HIA, that's it. So he might be in some doubt. This guy was really hyped up, but most likely won't make the starting side. Garner didn't play well in the trial. Don't think that matters too much, but that's why people are trading him out. Burden, same thing. Reports that he wasn't as involved in the trial. Again, it just might be around, preseason, right? I wouldn't pay too much. If you were going to pick him 2 weeks ago, you should be picking him now. I think that's a little bit silly. I think it's hit people that he won't be playing in the 17. Elliott under some doubt for round 1. I really hope people haven't made a decision of them losing the World Cup challenge, but that could maybe explain Cleary. Warbrick, he is the winger for the Storm, had like a big tackle busting try, played really well, so that explains that. Cam Pereira should get a few weeks for the Titans, obviously scored a few tries in a trial, so people are big on him at, I'm assuming, minimum price. Jackson Ford named to start in the trial, but as I said, I would not touch this guy with how much of a sort of like logjam that the Warriors have in their pack. Katoa, Storm, empty spot. He should be the one keeping that spot. Fair enough. Rookie, goal kicking, cheapy. Well, I don't know what changed with Hines, but there you go. Carrigan, class, won the Wally Lewis medal last year, played really well, should step up for the Broncos. So this explains some of the more popular and unpopular fantasy picks. Hopefully that helps out for Supercoach as well. But that's pretty much it, guys. I think, as I said, I will be putting out a video every Wednesday as well as our punters preview article. That'll be a little bit more in depth. This has been obviously quite high level because we don't know the final teams. These are predicted teams. Once we've got our odds comparison tool set up on Tuesday evenings, I can talk through some of the value plays. And obviously Draft Stars, we've got some good news in that we're partnering with them again for the 2023 NRL season. So we'll have our stats Bible to help you pick your teams, content, sort of break down some of the forward packs and who you should be picking in your team and who you should maybe fade. And as always, please join our Discord community, follow us on our socials. We'll have a whole bunch of NRL content coming out come next Tuesday. Hope you enjoy this video. If you've got any recommendation and sort of, if I should babble on a little bit less or spend a little bit more time on something, let us know. It's the first video I've done, so definitely more than happy to sort of change it up going forward. Anyways, guys, enjoy your planning of the NRL season, and we'll catch you sort of next Tuesday, Wednesday when team lists come out for round 1.